and welcome to PAX. Welcome to the Witcher 3 panel. Y'all excited to be here? Awesome. Well, I am supremely honored to have you guys here with me, and welcome to our special guests who have made a long flight all the way from Warsaw, Poland, to be here with us today, to come talk to you guys. They're going to talk to us mainly about how to turn books into games. But first, before we get started, let's do some quick introductions so we know who we're talking to here. I'm going to go first real quick. Oh, sure. My name is Co-Carnage. I'm a daily variety streamer on Twitch.tv. Oh, a mic. Oh, good.
That
Super.
Yeah.
I'm a variety streamer on Twitch.tv, streaming every day, generally by 10 a.m. EST. I recently completed a 100% Witcher 3 playthrough. We did every single quest, got every single map objective. It was amazing, 160 hours. I may have shed a manly tear at the end. But let's get to the reason you're here. Let's introduce yourself.
All right, yeah, so I'm Travis Currett, and first of all, I just got to say I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. This has just been so amazing to be at PAX, and I mean, the best part has been meeting all these fans. Like, you guys are awesome. Like, seriously, I recognize some faces already. People have come by our booth, and meeting guys like Co-Carnage and listening to your stories of your experience with the game. I mean, we're going to relay that back to the rest of the team in Warsaw, and like, you know, that's what keeps us going, so that's just awesome to hear. But the other reason why I'm absolutely thrilled to be here is this is actually kind of a homecoming for me because I am a proud graduate of the University of Washington. Go Huskies! Yes. So it's awesome for me to be back. So I left Seattle about 4.5 years ago, went to Poland. Been working with CD Projekt since the early days of work on The Witcher 3. And so my role is as a translator and English writer. And so I'll turn it over to Kuba.
Hello, my name is Jakub Szamałek, but everyone calls me Kuba. And I'm a senior writer at CD Projekt Red, or CD Projekt Red, as we pronounce it in Poland. And apart from that, I'm also a novelist, so I wrote 3 crime novels and a children's book together with my wife, Maria. What else? Well, I joined CD Projekt roughly 3.5 years ago, so I've been working on The Witcher 3 from the very beginning, and I'm also super, super excited to be here. We talked to a lot of you guys, and the best part about PAX is that finally we can talk to you guys after you play the game and to see that you like it, to see that you enjoy it. It's the best thing ever. So thank you very much for stopping by our booth. It was amazing to talk to you.
That is absolutely fantastic. So Travis is a translator and one of the English writers. Jacob, a writer himself. And I understand this means you work quite closely together. So can you tell me a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so we work very closely. And as we've mentioned before, CD Projekt, or CD Projekt, was originally a Polish company, and our headquarters are in Warsaw, Poland. So this was quite a trek for us to get here, some 13,000 miles. We started out as a Polish company, quite small. So The Witcher 1 was done by 60 people, I think. The Witcher 2 by 90, 100 people. And with The Witcher 3, we've grown quite big. So right now we are 250, 80 people. And a growing segment of our team is international. So right now we have people from 17 different countries working at our offices in Warsaw. Our office language is English, but the story itself is still done in Polish. So I'm a member of a 5-people strong writers team, and we still work in Polish. So this is why we depend on Travis and another friend of ours, Boris, to make sure that the game works in English. And actually, the funny thing is that a lot of people don't actually know that this is a translated version of the game, which I think is a huge compliment to Travis. So thank you again for doing such a good job.
Well, I gotta say, you know, you can't polish a turd. So if the translation's good, it's because we've got such great source material to work with. Yeah, I don't know, how many of you guys, for example, knew that this was a Polish company and that Polish was, quite a few.
A lot of hands.
Okay, wow.
That's awesome. So how many of you knew that the Witcher series is based on books? Quite a lot. That's awesome. That's good to know. So yeah, these are a series of books by Andrzej Sapkowski, or Andrzej Sapkowski, I guess would be the way you'd transliterate it there, pronounce it phonetically. And so So these are a series of books that are all extremely well known in Poland. He started writing them about in the mid '80s, and well, continues to this day. He released the most recent one last year, 2 years ago, I think. So these books have achieved absolute massive cult status. They're very well known in Poland. So, but they're not quite as well known abroad. They're in some European countries they've been quite successful, but they're just starting to enter the U.S. market and that sort of thing. So. What are...
Sorry, I'll just interrupt. So we are happy to say that after the release of The Witcher 3, the Sapkowski's book went on New York Times bestseller list. So now he's becoming more widely known, and it's great because the books are absolutely awesome. So
Yes.
you guys should give them a go.
Yes, so just in brief, what are these books about? Well, they are about The Witcher, more or less. So The Witcher is a traveling monster slayer. He's one of the last remaining people of this caste of mutants who are specially sort of trained to slay these monsters that entered this universe during this tragedy about, a couple hundred years before the things take place. And so Geralt of Rivia, the Witcher, he wanders the world pursuing contracts on monsters, and then meanwhile he always gets tangled up in all sorts of messy stuff. And if you guys have played the game, you've got an idea of the kind of messy stuff he gets tangled up in. And so the books are both a series of short stories that just kind of are little one-off hunts that Geralt goes on, and also a saga of 5 novels that tell the tale of Geralt. And this is where Ciri comes in, who we've brought in to our most recent game, and it kind of tells their story of how they go together and how they first met. And yeah, and then our games to pick up where Sapkowski left off after that, and we tell what happens to Geralt and Ciri after his books.
Excellent. So that brings us to kind of our main topic here. The Witcher games, which have been praised in particular for their storytelling, believable characters, and immersive world, were based on books. So would you say turning books into games is a recipe for success?
No. So that's partly the reason why we decided to talk about this with and introduce this topic. Because we've learned the hard way that turning books into games is a tricky business. And kind of when you look at it, thank you very much. So when you look at the most successful games of the last few years, you would be hard-pressed to find book adaptations. There's a lot of comic adaptations, movie adaptations, but books adaptations not so much. On the other hand, if you take a look at the list of the highest grossing, most successful movies of the last few years, you will see a lot of book adaptations there. So there's something off, and there's something difficult about turning books into games. Basing on our experiences with The Witcher 3, we kind of brainstormed what are the reasons why this is so tricky, and this is something that we'd like to explore a bit more today.
So what are some of the challenges involved with turning a book into a game?
Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is that fans, bless their hearts, they tend to be completionists. They tend to want to be diehard fans of a franchise. So how many of you out there, when you get into a franchise, just have to devour everything to do with it? I mean, yeah, that's a really common attitude. So the problem is, if you're trying to build your game based on an epic series of fantasy novels, that's, a couple thousand pages, that's, a couple months that the fans have to, that a lot of fans feel that they should get through before they can even approach your game. And so trying to communicate that might not be necessary or overcome that perceived hurdle is a lot more, whereas like if you're making a game based on a movie or a comic book, the time commitment is significantly less.
Yeah, and the other thing is that until recently, Sapkowski was not that widely known outside of Europe, and especially not in the US. So we thought that quite a lot of people, instead of being interested more in our game because it was based on a book, were kind of turned off because they'd never heard of it. It seemed obscure. So this was a struggle for us because we had to communicate that these books are cool and our game is even cooler, like in some respects. Like it's a great game. But another thing is that, when you make a game based on a book, of course you have this amazing lore that you can build upon, but you're also constrained by it. And whenever you try to change the smallest detail in the world, the people who read the books will be upset. or at least they will be concerned. And just to give you one example, The Witcher 3 is an open world game, so you can explore it in a number of different ways, also vertically. So you can climb mountains and you can dive underwater and so on. And to kind of make that fun, we had to populate the air and the waters with monsters. And the problem is that fighting with swords underwater, kind of difficult. Throwing, like casting spells underwater, like fire-based spell underwater, also not that great. So we knew that we have to add a new weapon to Geralt's inventory, and we decided to give him a crossbow. But in the books, it is said explicitly, Witchers do not use bows or crossbows. So our fans were initially concerned, like, why did you depart from the lore? And we had to kind of explain that this is justified by our gameplay requirements, and it's a bit of a compromise. But we had like this really heated discussion on our forums. And now that the game is out, I think everyone is happy with this addition. But this illustrates that even the smallest detail, like even the smallest thing, when you do it in a different way than it was done in the books, people might be a bit concerned. So you have to be very careful not to rub them the wrong way.
Yeah, and there's an additional difficulty is that when your book has been translated into a lot of different languages before you start on the game, you're not just dealing with one canon, you're often dealing with as many canons as there are different languages. So we had a bit of an interesting thing we ran into when we were making The Witcher 3. So how many of you have been by our booth and seen the unicorn? Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. You guys all get your photos on it and stuff. And so, yes,
we did, but it's embarrassing, so we decided not to share it.
Ours turned out a little, compromising. So, but yeah, so like that is an iconic moment from our game. If you guys have seen Conan's thing, that's definitely, there you go. You see, that's.
So generally, Yennefer has this fetish that she likes to get it on stuffed animals, and we don't know why Andrzej Sapkowski thought this is, thing, but it is, and we embrace it. We are, we accept all, kind of thing.
Yeah, that scene in the books, because this is actually, this is from Sapkowski from the books, and it's a very intriguing scene the way he describes it there. So yeah, this was an iconic moment from the books that we're like, since we're fans of the books too at the studio, we're doing Witcher 3, we were like, we want to put that in there. But then when they threw it to the localization department, we're starting to make them the different language versions, we ran into something because in the French versions of the book, turns out the French translators didn't quite know Polish as well as they might have hoped, and they had translated unicorn as rhinoceros.
Well, that is just a unicorn with more curves.
Yeah, in a way.
I suppose.
And also, I get you get more room on a rhino. So, I mean, there are advantages to it, but it was different in the French
it kind of lacks some of the romance.
Yeah, and I think the skin is rougher. So, like with a friction situation, it might be a bit of a.
How far are we going to go with this, guys?
Get it right. And I think we really nailed it with The Witcher 3, but embarrassingly, with The Witcher 2, we forgot about this. So we created this tutorial in the prologue section of The Witcher 2, which fails to mention who Witchers are, who Geralt is specifically, what Witchers do, and so on. So people were surprised after playing the game for 10 hours that they're actually supposed to kill monsters, because that was not a thing before. So as we said, we learned it the hard way. You have to make sure that everyone is on the same page by the time they finish the prologue of the game.
So that being said, wouldn't it be a lot easier then to create a main character from scratch, rather than one that you have to kind of ask the player to jump into the role of the guy with the huge backstory that they may not know?
We thought so as well at first. When the early days of The Witcher 1, when we were first starting work on it, that was the plan. You weren't going to be Geralt of Rivia because his story had been told by Sapkowski. We're going to start with a new Witcher, and you're going to be able to, forge your own destiny.
It was supposed to be Berengar, for those of you who played The Witcher 1. It's a character from the game.
Who remembers Berengar? You guys, some
hard fans.
Yeah. Guy's been with us for ages. That's awesome. But we came to the conclusion pretty quick. Well, we at that point, CD Projekt Red, I hadn't quite started yet, but the guys decided that this whole universe, what is great about the books is Geralt of Rivia. Rivia. He is the Witcher. He is just such a great character. And they've also felt that, you know, we can do more things with him because he's not like your typical fantasy hero where he starts out as a poor shepherd and then gets called to greatness, and by the end he's fulfilled his destiny. It's like, no, Geralt has been wandering the world for years. Yeah, how old do you guys think Geralt is? Who thinks Geralt's in his 60s? How old? A million. No, 120 over here. That's about right. Yeah, exactly. Geralt, he's been around for ages, killed a lot of monsters, so it's so there's a lot of more stories to be told about Geralt. So we decided, you know what, we can do this.
Yeah. And this is indicative of a wider problem that people who make games out of books run into, is that people expect game adaptations to have the same cast, because what you love about games is the characters and the story. But frequently, the story in the book has a natural closure, and especially so with the Witcher saga. I'm not going to spoil anything, but you know, there's a moment when it seems like this is the end of the story.
It's very Game of Thrones-y there.
Yeah, and we had to kind of pick it up. So we felt that, you know, we have to tell the story of Geralt, but there's so much baggage behind him, like, you know, all 7 books that we have to summarize or kind of introduce people to. So this was quite of a hassle, but again, I think we've emerged victorious, eventually, at least. Yeah.
So how about another approach to this then? Why not retell the story from the books, rather than come up with a new one taking place before or afterward? After all, the story is generally the book's biggest strength. This is how movie adaptations work too. You retell the already known story. So
Yeah.
why not that approach?
So this would be fantastic because it would save so much work, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The problem is that in video games you identify yourself very strongly with the main character. It's your adventure. It's not somebody else's adventure. You want to live it. You want to feel like your choices matter, like that what you do in this world has real effect on it. And if the story would have a foregone conclusion, you would feel frustrated. If your choices would not matter, you would feel frustrated. So playing a game where you know exactly what happens and where everything is defined from the beginning would basically be a horrible slog. So paradoxically, even though the story is the biggest strength of the book, it is really difficult to retell the same story and make a good game out of it. I mean, of course, there are exceptions. I know the first Dune being a notable one. And actually, our PR marketing friend, Mihao, there in the first row, is a big fan of the game. But overall, we have to come up with a new story which is similar to what you read. It has the same feel, but it's something new, something different.
So that being said, are some types of stories easier to turn into games than others? Or on the contrary, are some types of games easier to make out of books than others?
For the latter part, I think there's definitely that some games are much easier to make out of books than others. Yes, definitely. For example, adventure games are sort of natural genre to adapt books from. And for example, there's been some great examples of this. Dune, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If any of you guys are old text-based fans, you know that was all really actually done by the author of the book himself to a large part, and followed the book quite closely. And like the Discworld series, and I think there's a lot of potential there to take a novel, add some elements of choice and interaction to it, and you can make a pretty straightforward adaptation into an adventure game. And I think another sort of interesting space to explore are these Gone Home style exploration games where, you know, you can take a book that's heavy on atmosphere, or kind of like do a novel of letters style thing and turn it into a game there. But when you're talking about AAA action RPGs or action shooters, that sort of thing, it gets a lot more complicated because people expect a lot of gameplay, they expect to have a lot of control over the world, and that's where you have to think a lot more carefully.
Yeah. And I think a good example of how tricky this can be is that there are some books which seem like an ideal basis for a game, but actually are not. And I think a very good example here are books by Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft, because they seem like a wonderful basis for a game. They have a wonderful, unique feel to them. But what is so characteristic of Lovecraft novels is the feeling of powerlessness, of being out of control, of being doomed because the beings you are facing are so powerful. But this doesn't necessarily work in video games, and of course, adapting the Lovecraft novels into games has been attempted, and some of the games are quite good, but not really. They didn't get to the AAA mainstream tier. And I think this is partly because you don't really enjoy playing as a character which does not have influence over what's going on. You don't enjoy feeling powerless and out of control. Games are very much about being in control and influencing the course of events. But this doesn't really work with the world that Lovecraft created.
Okay, so do foreign non-English books present any particular challenges in terms of adapting them into games meant for a broader, kind of more international audience?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because books are often written for a sort of specific market in mind. I mean, since most books are read in their original language and not in translation. I mean, I think for the American market, it's like 3% of all books are translated from another language. So most people the writers are used to aiming for a community of shared knowledge.
Yeah, and just for comparison, in the Polish book market, I think roughly 36% of books are translated. So it's 3% in the US and 46% in Poland, and it's not atypical for Europe. So in Europe, it's in roughly between 20 and 50% of books are translated.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of the reason why Sapkowski's novels are well known in many European countries, but still just making inways into the US, because we're not used to reading works in translation. So some of the things you run into when it's a work in translation is like, well, for example, how many of you have heard of Hansel and Gretel? I would imagine everybody, right? But how many of you have heard of Baba Yaga? Oh, a good amount too. Okay, but like that, in Slavic countries, like that is just as well known as Hansel and Gretel. And Sapkowski, in his work, he draws a lot on the fairy tales that he assumes his readers will be just absolutely familiar with, and that would be one of them. And he also draws on monsters like, Noon Race and Night Race, which are really embedded in the folklore of Central Eastern Europe, but might be not so familiar to American readers, where we've kind of got this canon of fairy tales taken from Grimm and Mother Goose and that kind of stuff, and that's what we're familiar with. And he draws on a much broader spectrum. It's not 100% just Polish sources. Like, he draws on a lot of Norse mythology, he draws on a lot of Celtic stuff, you guys might have noticed. And he draws, but he also draws on this huge untapped wealth of Slavic mythology that might not be as well known to people outside the country, and we got to kind of figure out how to convey that. Now, that's not all that hard, because this stuff is really cool. Like, I think this is actually one of the big strengths of the books and of the game is, you got stuff like, you see our fiend up there, and this is a creature, well, loosely inspired by Slavic mythology, and the basic ideas translate well, but when you get to the linguistic aspects, that's a lot harder, because the Polish name for that is bies. And like, okay.
Although you don't have to pronounce it in this way, you don't have to sound this hardcore. You can also say yes, but yes, it's much cooler.
I was trying to drama, But some of them have really unpronounceable names, like the iconic monster from the first Witcher in the stories is Striga. Striga. It just like has a ton of consonants in a row. So when you get to the names of these, you got to try to figure out, okay, so how do we convey this to people? And so we take a lot of different approaches. Like, sometimes we try to go for the essence of it, the meaning of it, and that would be something like Night Wraith, which is actually Północnica in Polish. And so we kind of, translate, that means the midnight woman, so to speak. And so we do that. But sometimes we just do more, just a palatable version of the Slavic name, like with Striga becomes Striga, or like Lesha becomes Leshin, that sort of thing.
But the bigger problem comes in when, so our goal with all the different language versions, and there are 16 different language versions of The Witcher 3, ranging from Arabic to Japanese. And we wanted each of this version to feel like it was aimed at this very market. So we don't want you to feel like we are playing a lesser translated version of the game, which is cool. But if we achieve this goal, the problem arises that you forget that you're playing a translated version of the game. And there is one very, very good example of this problem, is that And you might have noticed, or you might have heard the controversy that The Witcher does not have people of color. And some people argue that this is some sort of omission or maybe a statement on our part, whereas it is definitely not. It's just that we tackled similar certain issues from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, it's like, I can totally imagine that American gamers who sit down and play this, that immediately will strike them as like, this is just a huge aspect of my reality is absent from this game. Like, I'm used to walking down the street and seeing like this cornucopia of colors, so to speak, and here in this game, this must be some kind of weird statement they're making, how they don't want to do this. And it
50 Shades of White.
50 Shades of White, but it's more of an issue of like, so in Poland, on the other hand, it's quite homogenous in terms of skin color, but like every day you read the papers, there's a new controversy about things like the Kielce pogrom after the war, when there was a huge massacre of Jews and like all the fighting between Ukrainians and Poles during the war, and that is like a huge aspect of the reality in which the games and the books were created, and we feel like those are often, we make very direct references to those in the game, and our the way we have non-humans and humans and their relations in the Church of the Eternal Fire. Like, so it was, we had become so absorbed with hitting these issues that are absolutely the forefront of Polish consciousness that we didn't quite have time to address the issues that are bigger in other countries.
Basically, we tackled the problems of racism and chauvinism through our own lens, through our cultural experience, which might not really resonate with a foreign audience. But the problem is that you don't really remember that necessarily when you play, so it comes out awkwardly. But that's the issue of making a game which is then released in so many different countries and cultures.
Yeah, because when people read books and stuff, sometimes they do it as a deliberate sort of anthropological learning exercise. But when you play a game, you want to have fun, and you don't want to have to have this grain of salt like, oh, that's how they do things over there. You just want to play the game and enjoy it.
Interesting. So in terms of challenges, we've covered people not knowing the source material, dealing with an established canon, figuring out what elements of the story will work for a game and what won't, facing cultural differences. Are there any others you want to mention?
Well, there's one that I'd like to mention very briefly, and that's the lack of visual code. So basically, when you adapt a comic book or a movie into a game, you already have a lot of the visual code out there for you. Whereas with the books, not necessarily so. Everything is described, but hardly anything is visualized. There are some things like, let's say, Harry Potter's, or should I say, Harry Potter's round glasses. So this is recognizable. But with The Witcher, we didn't have that. And we had to come up with something recognizable, the visual language. But most importantly, we had to create characters from the books. And this was difficult. So this was our first attempt. This is Geralt from the first version of the game. We are getting there, but not quite. So let's see what he looked like in the second installment of the game.
And I was stunned when I saw this.
Yeah, so this is actually Geralt from the early screenshots from The Witcher 2. And people did not like this version very much. So basically, there was so much negative feedback regarding this particular version of Geralt that we decided to completely drop it and start from the beginning. So The Witcher 2 was kind of turbulent for Geralt. So with The Witcher 3, we went to this, and this is the version that we are most happy with. And we think that this is the iconic look for Geralt and for Witchers generally. So as you can see, this took us some time, actually something like 15 years to get it like really right. So it would have been much easier just to take something that was already worked out. And similarly, we had problems with Yennefer, so Geralt's love interest. So she is described in the games, in the books, but not very in great detail. So we know that she wears black and white, and she has violet eyes. And everyone who read the books has a vivid imagination of what she looks like. But these versions might not necessarily be identical, and we don't necessarily share the same version of her, or we don't visualize her in the same way. So again, with Yennefer, we had several attempts. This is the final result, the final version of Yennefer's model, but actually we had 4 different models before that. Again, we struggled to get her just right. But we are very, very happy with the final version.
So those are a lot of challenges. I'm going to be blunt. Is it still worth it? Why even bother adapting a book into a game when it's this much work?
Well, as much as we mentioned, the problems with the fans having expectations and stuff, it's great to have fans already. When you start a new IP, you got a tough sell ahead of you to bring people on board. Whereas if you're adapting a book into a game, you've already got all these people who actually adore the books. And I think especially when it's something like The Witcher, where it hasn't been made into a blockbuster movie, it had been made into a movie, which you guys can YouTube. And yeah, just YouTube it. And don't maybe.
Don't YouTube it. Okay,
yeah,
never mind.
But it hadn't been like Lord of the Rings eyes, so to speak, right? The fans, like this was their big chance to see their game or their book made into something in another medium, and so bam, already you got them on board.
And another thing is that we cannot overestimate the importance of the lore that we have at our disposal. So this is absolutely, hands down, the most important thing. So Sapkowski had 20 years to figure out the Witcher universe, and he did a fantastic job. Working in a video game industry, we usually have a few years to get the game from the initial design to your shelves, to your computers. So we don't have that much time. And it is impossible to create such a rich world within the constraints of the production cycle. So think of the Middle Earth, Tolkien's Middle Earth. He needed decades to get it right. He was a professor at Oxford and studied a number of different cultures and myths to get it right. So what was fantastic is that we had this rich lore at our disposal, and this allowed us to create a world which feels real, which feels authentic, that you can really immerse yourself in. And this alone makes it absolutely worth all the hassles and all the problems.
Yeah, and then you also got the sense that this is a tried and true approach. Like if we were to just pitch somebody out of the blue, all right, we're gonna have a Witcher and he's really into a sorceress, and oh yeah, he's got this adoptive daughter. We might be like, this is kind of a weird plot, right? Is this gonna work? But yeah, we know it can work because it's been done. Yeah.
So did CD Projekt Red have all this in mind when they chose to make a game based on The Witcher?
Yeah, so I'd like to say that we did, and that we were super smart about it, and we had all the pie charts and tables and focus groups, but actually that was not the case, and we were just lucky because we were super excited about making our first game, and we knew it has to be based on the Witcher books because they are an absolute hit in Poland. So we knew it's going to be Geralt and the Witchers. And it worked out, luckily, but it is only with hindsight that we know why.
And luckily, like you said, it worked out. Why do you think the Witcher books have adapted so well into games?
Well, the core idea of what a Witcher is really just a wonderful thing to make into a game because it's very gamey to begin with. It's this idea of a wandering monster slayer. So you got some gameplay right there. He's going to wander. He's going to slay monsters.
It's a good premise.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's awesome, and then it's also this thing that, it resonates. He's sort of like the sheriff of the Old West. So it's an easy, he's kind of almost like a Ronin too. Like it's an easy idea to communicate. And so, so that I think was a great starting point.
Yeah, and so traveling the world and fighting, that's a lot of gameplay in any open world RPG. But there's actually way more. So the books, this is amazing. The books have already got all the gameplay mechanics we needed. So Sapkowski describes in some detail how Witchers fight, that they use two swords, one for monsters, one for humans, that they use many different bombs, and he describes how they work. They use 6 magical signs, simple spells, they use oils, etc., etc. So it's all there within the universe. We don't have to make this up. We don't have to come up with some gameplay to force within this world. It's all forms a coherent whole, and it works perfectly.
Yeah, and we also adapted a lot of narrative techniques from Sapkowski that worked well. So as we mentioned earlier, Sapkowski wrote a bunch of short stories that are about these sort of isolated monster hunts and a saga with an overarching epic storyline. And so right there, you've got main quests, side quests, and we could, we could sort of take some inspiration from that. And one thing thing that he loved to do that we have tried to also implement in our games is that you often have like a twist or two. Like you start out on what seems like a run-of-the-mill monster hunt, and like, oh wow, everybody is lying to me, and you get embroiled in things. So like that was something that works really well in games.
Yeah, and last important thing really is that in the books, Geralt has to stay neutral. This is the Witcher's code. He should not meddle in other people's affairs. He should not take sides. But as you may already have discovered, the world of The Witcher is an absolutely awful place. It's grim. It's full of awful people. So Geralt tries to navigate his way within this world, but he's often facing situations where it would be awful not to react, not to meddle. But then when he does, the effects are often contrary to what he expected, and he gets into more trouble. So this was a very important part of the books. So we wanted to make sure that it is also a part of our games. And wow, did it take off. So the thing is that we didn't really realize that, but gamers love seeing that their decisions matter, that the choices they make have an impact, that the world is flexible, it reacts to your behavior. So this was a part of the book, and it was a part of the game, and I think it really allowed The Witcher to be something else, something very different. So I think we could really go on, but we're gonna eat up the Q&A time.
That's
right. So maybe let's try to wrap things up a little bit.
I got one more for you here.
Yeah.
So if you were to pick a new book, with everything we've talked about these, to base the new IP on, what would you look for?
Well, actually, we have to. We'll stick with The Witcher for a little bit. So, two exciting things are coming your way. The first expansion to The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, Hearts of Stone, is coming out in October. So it's right around the corner, and this is going to be 10 hours plus of new content, new stories. As you can sort of see on the screen, Geralt gets into trouble. But I'm sure, a lot of trouble, yeah. But I'm sure that with your assistance, he'll be able to work his way out, although there will be some tough choices on the way.
And that's not all. So coming up after that, we are going to bring you the next expansion, the first part of 2016, and that is called Blood and Wine. And with this, we're going to be introducing a whole new region to the world of The Witcher 3, the region of Toussaint.
Which we are very familiar with the wine.
Yes, I hope you've been downing it often as you play. And this will also be a treat to people who are fans of the books, because this is a region that's featured there, and there's some very memorable adventures there. And yeah, and this is going to be packed with 20 plus hours of main storyline and all sorts of
So
other
these
stuff.
two expansions put together will be roughly the size of The Witcher 2. So there's a lot of new stuff coming up. Yeah.
And then after that, the next book we're going to be adapting is the Cyberpunk Rules book.
Yeah.
So I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you guys for your time and for being here. It's been incredible. We're going to spend a few minutes, I think, trying to answer some questions from the audience here. If you guys have any questions, you can come right over here to this mic on the right, and we will get started here. What's up, man?
Hi.
Hi.
I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you guys.
You're most
with
welcome.
the Day 1 edition of Witcher 3 gives the sticker, the soundtrack, and then a thank you note. And hearing you guys talk today, you have a lot of respect for the source material, a lot of respect for your fans. And so from us to you, thank you very much for making an awesome game with the awesome content.
Thank you.
With The Witcher 2, you had a much more structured experience because it was much smaller, and with The Witcher 3, it's a much more open world. How did you try to figure out the pacing for how to tell the story as you expanded the game world?
So we knew that we'll have less control over pacing than we did in the previous stories. So we wanted to create an open world in which you weave your own adventure, and to make sure that the side quests you do would have worked in a larger box. So Geralt does things that he normally would have done. So while following the main story, the epic search for Ciri, you do what Witchers do. So you hunt monsters, you get involved in all sort of sketchy situations, but it doesn't feel like a total diversion from what you were supposed to do. And you can combine elements of the main story with elements of the side stories to create your own epic adventure. So we wanted you to have control over the pacing of the story and to adapt the game to your own needs and expectations.
And one thing I really like that we did is we have certain summing up moments where we kind of like, you've been doing all sorts of random side points, but when you get to this point in the quest, and one of my favorite is when you are at Kaer Morhen and you meet with the other Witchers, and actually this is the man who brought that to you right here. And yeah, that's just, such a golden moment.
Yeah. So the drinking scene in Kaer Morhen with the other Witchers was definitely the most fun to do over the development. Yeah.
Excellent. Is the mic working over there?
Mine is.
Oh, I'm asking.
Oh.
Is it?
Yeah, go ahead. Go
I
ahead
got
with your
two
question.
questions. One, I want to know what they complained about the Geralt 2. And then I want to know what kind of advice would you give someone who really wants to play the first two games but is having trouble getting over the technology that's not as advanced and you're kind of spoiled having the better game?
As for the technology question, I don't know. Maybe taking your glasses off would help because you wouldn't see all the blurry textures and clunky animation. Well, the first game is I don't know how many years old now. It's 8 years old now, so it didn't age very well. The story is still fantastic. So if you kind of stick to it, it will be rewarding. But we are aware that the graphics are, somewhat dated. But this is only to be, expected with a game this old. And the first question was.
What did they complain about that
sorry.
first? I'm not really certain, but I
okay.
imagine they thought he was ugly.
Yeah, and it was a big departure from what he looked like in the first game. So basically, they thought he doesn't look like himself and that he's ugly. So, it's hard to argue with this sort of feedback. So we decided, okay, we'll back to the drawing board.
Excellent.
Okay, so The Witcher 3 is my first Witcher game, and there's so many characters in it that I wonder, were they in the original games or even in the books? Or were they new? Were most of the characters new or original?
It's I would say about half and half, or maybe more like 30% original, 70% new. Yeah, a lot of the core characters that you're with, like Yennefer, Triss, Ciri, Dandelion, those are from the books. We had them, well, except for Yennefer and Ciri, we had them from Witcher 1, Witcher 2. But then when you start getting into the side quests and some of the other aspects of the plot that we're introducing specifically for Witcher 3, a lot of those are characters that are new in The Witcher 3.
Okay, my question was Dijkstra and characters like him, Hjalmar, Ceres, were they in the books?
So Dijkstra was in the books and he played a big role. Hjalmar was mentioned but never appeared in the books, and Ceres we made up.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for your question. Go
So
ahead.
I've got two questions. With such a rich world, and I know this is the end of Geralt's story as far as we know, is there plans to do another game in the universe? And then my other question is, are we going to see a digital standalone Gwent or a physical standalone Gwent? Because that game's amazing.
Yeah. Oh my. As for the first question, well, we still have the two expansions to make. The first one is almost ready and it's shaping up really nicely. The second one obviously needs more work, so this is what we are focusing on right now. And it's hard to say what the future will bring, especially since we still have Cyberpunk to make in the meantime. As for Gwent, well, I'll pass on your request to our business team in Warsaw. But there are some good news for Gwent players coming up, so stay tuned. You won't be disappointed.
Yes.
For those that don't know, Witcher 3 is a card game with RPG elements.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Firstly, I wanted to say congratulations to you because I've been reading the books as I've been playing through The Witcher 3, but I enjoyed both The Witcher 1 and 2, and I have to say that the entire series is like a love letter to the books. There's so many things that in retrospect I realize are on the sly references, like Teruviel and all these sort of bit characters that play either a large or small part somewhere in the books, and it's really cool how well you've incorporated them all as sort of in-jokes, but without being intrusive. The question that I have is that I wondered, it seems like the story of The Witcher 3, it almost is the immediate consequential, like where you would think the story would immediately go right after the books. And and I'm wondering why you waited 2 games to get to characters like Yennefer and Ciri, who don't even really come up at all in the first 2 games, and you focus more on characters like Triss and Zoltan and everything else, which are all great stories. But I'm wondering what the decision was to do that.
That's a great question.
So we both weren't there when this was being decided because that was way in the past. But I actually had the same questions when I joined the company, and I think the answer is that we were kind of afraid. Because Yennefer and Ciri are a handful, especially Yennefer, because she is this mixture of really mean and really fantastic and super interesting. So I think we thought that this is a bit too much to tackle, and we wanted to give her justice and wait and hone our skills a bit, and I think it was well worth the wait because she came across really nicely in The Witcher 3.
I agree. Thank you.
Thanks.
And guys, I hate to do this because I'm sure we'd love to answer these all day, but we are very running low on time. So if we want to give a big round of applause for these guys one more time. Thank you. A couple quick extra things before we go. Big shout out and thank you to Jinx, who's been providing a lot of the apparel that you've seen with the Witcher stuff on it. In addition, if you actually get a Witcher 3 Arsenal zip-up, they give you a free medallion right now, which is pretty cool and something to look into. Also, if you're headed back to the show floor, on the 2nd floor is where you can join the community meetup. And that's also where you can get to see the unicorn and get your own personal pictures. But again, if you're going to find yourself on Twitter, make sure to follow the official Witcher game Twitter. If you're tweeting anything about Witcher, make sure to add the hashtag WitcherPAX. And again, thank you guys for coming. Really do appreciate it. Have a great time at
Thank you
PAX.
very, very, very much. We love you.
Whoa.